And we're back, ready to jump into the Parmenides next section. Let's get into it. Antiphon continues. Pythagoras said that on the one hand, when Socrates had said these particulars, he believed that both Parmenides and Zeno would be annoyed at each one of them. Whereas on the other hand, they themselves offered up their mind entirely to what he said, and frequently looked at each other smiling as if in admiration of Socrates. And that once Socrates ceased to speak, Parmenides then spoke. Okay, quick pause. We have a couple of keywords that are jumping at us right now in purple, thanks to the translator. N-O-U-N, known, nous, derivative of nous. They're offering up the highest part of their mind. See how it's in capital letters? What part of their mind? Nous. What's nous? The kind of mind that can have knowledge. What's knowledge? Using usia to turn about and experience itself directly. This one here. They're offering this up to what he said. What is the word that is pointing to him? Auto. A-U-T-O, right here. What does that mean? Self. So they are participating in the highest possible terms that we have in our game here. Nous and self. The honorific, and that beyond even the honorific. The ultimate. So, they're not annoyed at him, thank goodness. Thank goodness that they're not annoyed at our hero Socrates here. They're offering up their nous to his self and what he's saying. Parmenides speaks. O Socrates, how worthy of admiration is your impulse in the pursuit of the Logos! That's what we're after. And tell me, has thine self thus separated certain ideas apart from selves? Those, as you say, on the one hand, and in turn on the other hand, in the same way, set apart those that participate of these. Do you get me, Socrates? This is my Parmenides voice, because he's old and wise. Stay a while and listen. Have yourself separated certain ideas apart from themselves, as you say, and set apart those that participate of these? And does there appear to thee to be a certain likeness that is separate from self-likeness, and indeed a certain one, and many, and all other such particulars, which we possess, and of which you have just now heard from Zeno? What is he saying there? So, hey, have you separated certain ideas apart from each other, the selves, as you've said, but have you also set apart the ones that participate in them? Hey, have you separated the two? The things themselves and the things that participate? Because they might be different, son. This is a question. You've got a young Socrates who's already been celebrated. Hey, how worthy of admiration is your pursuit, your impulse in the pursuit of the Logos. He's been given 2 thumbs up from, I said 2 thumbs up He's been given 2 thumbs up from this. Okay, he gets 1 thumbs up from this great man, Parmenides. He's asked a question. He's challenged Parmenides' student. Did pretty well. But he missed something. So we have a question. What kind of response is this? Why is this the first thing out of his mouth? The first thing that Parmenides says is a kind of encouragement, and then he says, have you done this? If you were a great and wise philosopher, if you had this kind of enlightenment or access or seeing, if you were this leveled up an adventurer, how would you respond to someone just beginning to a level 1 character? Would you waste their time? Why is he saying this? Because he has got a good impulse in the pursuit of the logos, but he's not quite there. He's missing the mark. Are the first words or after the encouragement, are the very next things he said something to do with his problem? Is he trying to help the guy? Is he trying to point out something? He missed the mark. Could it be in this way? These are the sorts of questions we need to build for ourselves. Ask good questions. Think, and by that I mean, if you were writing this story, or if you were there, imagine yourself there in person. Imagine you were this wise man. What would you say? Because these can bring those questions. Hey, if I came across some guy who I can see is missing something, he has a deficiency, maybe I'd mention it, or maybe I'd help him, or maybe I'd ignore it, or maybe I would mock him for having, I don't know, what would you do if you're a good, wise man? And then you can ask, is he doing that? And if he is doing that, can we see it? Because philosophy is not about accepting belief, it's about seeing it for yourself. These are the sort of questions we want to build as we go. So Socrates, have you done that? Separated the ones that a certain one and many and such things, as well as the ones that we possess, participate in. There's a certain likeness separate from the self-likeness. There's a certain likeness. I'm like you in that we are both philosophers. But it's different from self-likeness. What does self do? Elevates it to being, to the honorific. Likeness itself. Not this apple is like that. You wouldn't say, likeness is in the apples. They're participating in likeness. For 2 apples to be alike. Oh, it's different though, Socrates, from self-likeness. Does it appear to you to be a certain likeness that is separate from self-likeness, and indeed a certain one and many in all such particulars that we possess, and of which you have just now heard from Zeno? Socrates says, oh yes. Socrates is younger. Oh yes, it does indeed to me. And now, how about the following ones? Is there a certain idea like that of justice, eternally, self by self, and of beauty, and of good, and all such ideas by themselves? Gonna pause here again, because what are we after? The logos. How do we do it? One of the things we do is collect in our inventory self-er terms. What are the key ideas? We're going to make a collection of them, make a web of them. So far, what have we got? One and many, likeness and unlikeness, rest and motion. We've got those in our bag. Because these guys have been talking about these things. And obviously, it's not the particulars. There's a self version of them. Now, Parmenides is coming to our aid and said, hey, you got a bunch of self-er pairs. Here is some selfers that are not pairs. Different kind of selfer term, or a self. Oh, by the way, we can go one step further because we've seen confirmation in the text showing that another word for selfer is, what did Zeno call what Parmenides is doing? The logos of Parmenides is the self-logos. So long as we know that we're after the selfers and the self, the honorific and the ultimate, not just particulars, we could say we're after the self-logos. Or the logos, because we know the word the takes it from individual examples. Someone's pathologos, personal opinions and beliefs from their upbringing and their culture that might be missing the mark, from the logos or the self-logos. So we're after self-er terms or the self-logos terms or the key ideas. Key ideas that can be cells themselves. And our friend, well, our dear wise teacher Parmenides has given us a few more to add to our inventory or our skill tree, however you want to see it, because we can use them now. We can look out for, next time I hear someone talk about justice, that's going to be significant. If I hear a character in the Platonic text talking about justice or beauty or good, my ears are going to prick up. I'm going to notice something. I don't care if nobody else does, I'm going to do it. Why? Because the very first thing this man said to the great Socrates, actually the second and third thing, but in the very first exchange, he mentions these words. He brings them out. He wouldn't waste his time talking about insignificant things, particular things. Someone of this level of seeing of the logos, someone who can participate in the higher ideas, the honorific, the brilliant light of being, and maybe even the ultimate beyond even experience of ideas, why would he waste his time with small talk? Have you ever seen Sherlock Holmes? Have you ever seen Sherlock Holmes or someone else who's good at solving puzzles and noticing patterns? House, if you've ever seen that show, they're not sorts of people who would waste their time talking about mundane, insignificant things. These are philosophers. So, we don't know what justice is yet. We don't know what beauty is, or the good is. But here we know that they can be ideas, they can be held directly, they can be eternally self by themselves, self by self. Oh, they're in the class of the things that are knowable. They go beyond physical senses and therefore go beyond opinions. They're in the realm of truth. True things. Perhaps keep in mind this is a deduction that we're doing from, or we are hypothesizing this based on the logos of the text. What does that mean? Hypothesis is a likely account. It's not true. Yet. You hold on to this truth, you carry it with you, you level up with it, you use it until you can verify it for yourself in your direct experience. That's the difference. A hypothesis is a springboard into that which is beyond hypothesis, the unhypothetical, the direct, the knowable. So, until you get there, keep this as a hypothesis. Maybe beauty and good and justice, maybe they're in the class of the things that we can know. So, Parmenides. And how about the following ones? Is there a certain idea, like that of justice, eternally self by self, and also of beauty and of good, and all such ideas by themselves? Socrates says, oh yes. What next then? Is there an idea of humans and of all the elements, such as we are composed of, and a certain ideal human self, and one of fire and of water that is separate from us? Socrates, oh, I have certainly often been in dire straits, puzzled, and at a loss, O Parmenides, concerning whether it is necessary to speak of those selves just as we did about those ideas, or if we should speak about them in another way. He's often been puzzled whether the same way we can talk about beauty and good and justice, we can talk about fire and water and the elements and humans and an ideal human. He doesn't quite know. Are you at a loss? I'm at a loss. I don't know. I'd like to. So it goes in my bag. Not I'd like to, I'm going to forget about it. I like to, and I'm holding on to it as a question. Are these things knowable? Parmenides. Are you also at a loss about the following particulars, O Socrates? Whether it is necessary to affirm that there is a separate idea of each one of these, which may also appear to be ridiculous, such as an idea of hair and clay and dust, or of anything else which may also appear to be quite without honour and most worthless, by being other in turn than those particulars with which we are familiar, or whether it's not necessary that there are such things. Interesting. Right? We noticed that we can see particulars. We talked about stones and woods and people with hands earlier, but he's saying, well, what about the things that are quite ridiculous and worthless? Hair and clay and dust. I think the word clay can be mud as well. Hair and mud and dust. Did these have an idea of them? In the same way, likeness. He said, oh, by the way, you notice that there are things that have likeness, right? He said, oh, yeah. Like one apple is like another apple. You are like me and that we're people. Yeah, so we have likeness. But you do know that it's different from the idea of likeness, self by itself. The difference for things that participate in likeness, that kind of likeness, like apples, and the idea, right? Oh yeah. Well, what about these things? What about elements? What about humans? Hey, what about ridiculous things like hair, mud, and dust? Hair, clay, and dirt. What about those things? Like we have things that maybe participate in the idea? Or are there not ideas of those things? What are the ideas? You're okay with beauty and good and justice, but what about hair and mud and dirt? Do these have an eternal, immortal existence? Can you know them? What do you reckon? What do you reckon? Again, imagine this guy was talking to you. You have come across these videos or other texts or other philosophers who are awakening to the philosophical game, and they've mentioned such a thing as ousia or idea. You're like, oh my goodness. Or maybe you've had a spiritual experience. Maybe you've had an encounter of something that's outside of the physical. A near-death experience or a yoga experience, or sometimes playing sport, people can separate from their bodies. It happens often, or happens on occasion. And you've noticed that there are things that are of a higher realness. Okay, well, hang on a second. There's that, which I get to experience if I'm lucky sometimes, maybe in a dream. But then there are things that share in it, like pure beauty and beautiful things, or pure likeness, I experienced to be completely like, what would pure likeness be? Well, we talked about in the experience of Usia, we have minding mind. Would that be completely like itself? Would that be the most like likeness? Would that be experience in Usia? Would that be pure, the idea, the highest kind of Usia? And if that experience is outside of time, because the mind is not physical, if that's outside of time and prior to time, is that an eternal experience of pure likeness? Could that be what they're talking about? Get puzzled. Become at a loss. So he's saying, well, okay, but what about hair, mud and dirt? What do you reckon? Socrates. On the one hand, I do not affirm that these exist in any other way from these which we indeed also see. But on the other hand, is it not the height of absurdity, insofar as one imagines that there is a certain idea of these selves? Seems crazy. But on one hand, it seems that you would, but it seems crazy on the other hand. Nevertheless, at times, it also actually troubles me in regards to whether or not the very same thing can be affirmed of everything, if everything has an idea. But thereafter, having been fixed in this opinion, I then run away fleeing, in fear of falling at that time into a certain abyss of nonsense and utterly perish. But then I reach up from those considerations, and again I seriously apply myself to those considerations, concerning which we have now just asserted, whether such ideas have to exist. Wow. What do you think of that response? Pretty cool, right? I mean, quite honest. He's being quite open. He's saying, hey, sometimes I think about whether you can have ideas of those things, but I get so troubled that I'm going to lose myself. I'm going to fall into an abyss and like completely perish, completely lose myself. I don't know. So I stop. Imagine that. Wondering about these things so much that you feel that you're afraid of falling into an abyss of nonsense and utterly perishing. Wow, he's being quite honest, isn't he? He's being quite open. Oh, but then he again picks himself up. What does he say? I reach up. And then I seriously apply myself again to those thoughts concerning whether such ideas have to exist. And of course exist in the idea sense. Okay, removing some of the highlights before we get to them. Okay. So, good for Socrates. Parmenides responds, that is because you are still a young man, O Socrates, so stay a while and listen. And philosophy has not as of yet received you into her embraces. For in my opinion, when you are received by her, you will not dishonor any of these selves. But now, since you are still young, you give heed to the opinions of human beings. Tell me then the following. Does it appear to you as to say that there exists certain ideas of which the other things have a share, thus keeping the names selves. Such as, on the one hand, those that have a share of likeness are like. Therefore, those that have a share of greatness are great. Whereas, on the other hand, those that have a share of justice and beauty come to be just and beautiful. Okay, what's going on here? So Parmenides is saying, well, we have a question, right? Why did Parmenides ask that of Socrates? Why was that his opener? And we thought, well, maybe it's because maybe he can see a problem and he wants to help. He did it. He said, well, he asked a specific question. Do you think there are ideas that participate and the ideas themselves? Like things and likeness. Yep. Okay, what about hair, mud, and dirt? Or hair, clay, and dust. Hair, mud, and dirt is in another translation. Just rolls off the tongue. And Socrates was like, yeah, you know what? That is my problem. I am stuck on that. I'm completely at a loss, and I feel like I'm going to fall into the abyss, lose myself in the abyss, fall into utter nonsense. Abyss of nonsense and utterly perish, he says. So it sounds like Parmenides is pretty good at seeing and directly hitting someone's problem. Provided he's someone like Socrates who has a what does he say? He has if you have a good impulse in the pursuit of the logos. Other philosophers. If you're watching along, you've reached this video, probably someone like you. Someone who, if is genuinely on this quest, the self quest, the self logos quest, right? You probably don't want to pick out and point out people's problems who aren't genuinely interested in truth, in developing, in evolving, in solving their puzzles so they can reach the higher goals, removing their path of logos to follow the logos. You probably, people who aren't interested in that, who do not have a worthy, admirable impulse in pursuit of that, you probably don't want to point out their problems. But someone like yourself or Socrates, who would be open to that sort of thing because they do care about the logos and knowing these things, well, he did a good job, didn't he, at nailing it down. And by the way, not only is that your problem, here's the cause. How good is that? Not just this is where you're limited. This is where you're limited, son. But this is the cause of that limit in the self-logos. What's the cause? Well, a couple of things, right? You are still young. Philosophy has not, as of yet, received you into her embraces. Another cause. When that happens, you will not dishonor any of these selves. So, a third cause, he is dishonoring these selves in some way. But since you are still young, you give heed to the opinions of human beings. So of all those causes, maybe this is the more primary, the more causal cause. He cares about the opinions of human beings. Can you imagine such a person? Can you imagine such a person who cares about what people think? Not just what people think in this sense, but their opinions Not the logos, the understanding, not their knowledge, but their opinions. Have you ever met someone who cares about the opinions of other people? Right, that's pretty much everyone, right? Right? That's like being human, right? When you're young. I mean, we hear people say, oh, when I grew up, I learned not to care about the opinions of people, of human beings. Okay. But when you grow up as philosophers, Parmenides is saying this is what you need to do. But at a higher level, this is the ideal of what those other people say. Oh, I don't care what people think. Well, really? Like, are there some opinions you still care about? Your own opinions or other human opinions? Or opinions from your family or your culture or your religion? Do you care about those opinions? You might not care about some opinions, but what about all opinions? From all human beings. Because that not caring about the opinions of human beings themselves elevates it. It's the ideal, it's the principle that they might be participating in a lesser kind of way. But this is the ideal. They probably don't know that this is the ideal. They almost certainly do not know this is the ideal, because to discover it, you would have had to have read this book. This book that's called The Greatest Book Never Read. Or a book like it that talks about the ideas, talks about selves themselves, talks about participation and the difference between sense objects that participate and the ideas themselves. If you do read that sort of book, maybe you've come across something like this. You will be limited in your ability to participate in the self-logos if you care about opinions at all that come from human beings. Wow. That's quite a pathologos to give up. Or it's quite a false logos. Pathologos has a specific meaning that refers to the root cause as well of your false thinking. So here he is talking about a root cause. So it could be a pathologos, but later on we'll get into more exactly what pathologos specifically refers to. So let's just call it the anti-logos, or non-anti-logos has a different meaning too. The sick logos, let's say the sick logos. To give heed to the opinions of human beings, says Parmenides, is the cause of a limitation that I've identified straight off the bat. What interesting seeing he has developed. Not just a seeing, what an interesting use of his seeing Parmenides is doing. Right, we talked about philosophy being like leveling up as an adventurer. You start to develop skills that affects your seeing, but also you can function with them to reach your most meaningful goals. Here is someone functioning with a seeing that he's doing to identify the limitation, the limit Socrates has, and its cause. And what's he doing with it? He is communicating to him through his words in dialogue. After first recognizing, hey, you're a good you have an admirable pursuit of the logos, so maybe I can share this with you. Sharing our seeing and our understanding, using what we've developed, using our seeing, functioning with it, with friends who are also on the philosophical quest, with friends who are also interested in the logos, To benefit them is part of the game. We're learning from this man how to be a philosopher. He is showing us how to awaken philosophy. Parmenides goes on. Tell me then the following. Does it appear to you, as you say, that there exists a certain idea of which other things have a share? I read this, let's keep going. Thus keeping the names of selves, such as on the one hand those that have a share of likeness are like, and those that have a share of greatness are great. Whereas on the other hand, those that have a share of justice and beauty come to be just and beautiful. Now, the word here is justice. One translates it as righteousness sometimes. It's one of the ways that other translators have translated it before. But oh my goodness. My Greek isn't fantastic. But you'll notice that the root of this word matches this word here. Just. Daikai. Sonus. If you can pronounce it, put it in the chat. So, he's starting with things he does see. He's not sure about hair, mud and dirt, or hair, clay and dust. But there are likeness and there are things that have a share in it called like. There is greatness itself, the idea of greatness, and there are things that share in it. Great. And likewise for justice and beauty. Socrates says, and by the way, we had an idea earlier. He mentions beauty, justice, and goodness. Could they be ideas? We had that before. If you had that as a question earlier, and you were holding on to it tight, like really tight, really tight, then here you have a kind of confirmation of your question. Or at least pretty close to it, right? Not a confirmation because you haven't seen it yourself, but in terms of understanding, hey, here he is saying, repeating it, being more specific. Add that to your question. Build it up. Aren't you interested in justice? Are you interested in beauty? So, have you seen that they have the same name when they have a share? Like likeness and greatness and beauty and justice? Socrates says, entirely so indeed. Parmenides, now surely is it not the case then that each thing which has a share either has a share of the whole idea or only a part? Or can there be some other way of participation apart from these two ways? Socrates, whole and part. If you have a share, it's either of the whole or a part, right? Socrates says, entirely so indeed. Parmenides asking a question, seeing if he's on board, and then going together through the reasoning process. Notice how this is different from a debate, different from people arguing with each other, different from fighting, like you see on philosophy debates or political debates or all that sort of thing. Are you on board? Is this where you're at? Then let's go to the next step. About what? About what's most significant, his limitation and his cause, his limit from the self-logos, preventing him from seeing that which is most important, the ideas such as beauty and justice likeness, one and many, motion and rest. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about meaningless stuff. And we're doing our best to address the cause of what limits you. And we're not fighting. We're going, hey, are you on board? Entirely so indeed. Let's go to the next step together. Now, surely, is it not the case then that each thing which has a share either has a share of the whole? I've read that already. Right, either a whole or the part, right? Socrates says. And how could there be? How could there be? Oh, sorry. Let's read it again. Surely is it not the case then that each thing which has a share either has a share of the whole, idea, or a part? Or can there be some other way of participation other than apart from these two? Socrates says, oh no, how could there be? Therefore, does it appear to you that the whole idea, being one, exists in each of the many? Or in what other way? What is there to prevent the whole idea, O Parmenides, to exist in each of them? Accordingly then, by being one and the same in many separate existences, then the whole is in each at the same time. And in this way, self will be separate from self. What just happened? He said, well, okay, we talked about there being the idea and things that share in them. If you share in them, it's either a whole, you're sharing in the whole of the idea or just a part of it. And he goes, well, by the way, the whole idea being one thing, one idea, can it be in each of the examples? Can every apple that's like every apple have the whole of the idea of likeness? Socrates said, well, what's to prevent that? Well, if the whole is in each of them at the same time, in the many existences, then the whole would be separate from each other and separate from the ideal. Socrates said, it cannot be in this way, but if the idea were indeed such as the self is to daytime, daytime being one, but it is at once present in many places. And yet self is in no way more separate from self, if then in this way every idea may also be at once one and the same in all. What did he just say? He said, well, daytime. The self, if the self is to daytime being one, that's present in many places. Lots of places are having daytime, but it's not separate. You experiencing daytime is not separate from daytimeness. But then you don't say, oh, I've got a part of daytime. We're all in daytime. Hey, you could live in a different part of the world and you've got daytime. You say, oh, I've got a part of daytime. You have a part and you have a part. No, it's daytime. It's the whole of daytime. So it's the whole in all of these different places at the same time. And he said, could the idea, could the self of the ideas be like this? Parmenides' response, well, you have made, O Socrates, one and the same aspect present at the same time in many places, in a very pleasant way with your daytime example, just as if you covered over many humans with a sail. Thus you say that there is one whole over many. Or is it not something such as this that you are led to say? So, what's he doing? Responding, oh, this is what you've done. But not just telling him, asking him, like, is this Right? And this is a good summary of what you've just done. By talking about the idea of daytime, you call it a whole, and you've put it like a sail over all humans. Is that what you mean when you say the whole of daytime is over all of these different people? Like a sail? Socrates says perhaps. That's a puzzle. He's not quite sure if his metaphor is matched by Parmenides' metaphor. Puzzle. Parmenides. Then either will the whole sail exist over each individual, or will one part of the whole self exist over each individual? So daytime is kind of a loose concept, right? He's refined it by talking about a sail. Okay, daytime is that's daytime, it's the whole sail. We might talk about it like a whole, but if it's a sail, you can see it better. And you can say, well, actually, isn't it just a part? Isn't it really a part of the sail? I mean, it feels like you're covered in the whole sail, but actually, is it a part of the sail that you have? And the next person has a part on top of him and a part on top of him. That's what he asks him. Socrates says, the part. Parmenides. Accordingly then, O Socrates, these ideal cells, idea cells, are divisible, and those that participate can only participate of the parts of cells. And hence there will no longer be one whole in each individual that participates in the idea cells, but only a part of each. Socrates. Whoa, it has come to light in this way indeed. Oh, did you see something? Dun 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 dun. Come to light. Why is he using that expression? Why is our author, Plato, using that expression? Come to light. He's seen something. What does that mean? Is it just a metaphor? Does it just mean he's got it? He's seen it? Keep that as a question. Parmenides. Or are you willing then, O Socrates, to affirm to us the truth that one idea is susceptible of being divided, and yet it will still be one? Is that what you're trying to say, young man? No, by no means, says Socrates. How can it be divided but still be one? That doesn't mean. Parmenides. For see that if thou attempts to divide the great self, if you attempt to divide the great self, the idea of greatness, then in that case, would it not be revealed to be without the logos? Uh-oh. And that each of the many that are great will be great by a part, like day or sail, like the day or sail metaphor of greatness, that is less than the greatness self. Now, of isn't there in the Greek, we can see that. So we have to keep in mind that one is translating this for normal audience, normies, for the NPCs. No, for all people who might themselves not be aware of the meaning of idea, of ousia, of autos. So it might be difficult if he translates it into what would sound to them as broken English. For example, less than the greatness self. The greatness self doesn't sound right in English. It does if you recognize greatness as an idea. and you recognize self has that meaning of the honorific, the thing itself purely metaphysically. So when we recognize as we read a key idea, a selfer idea, or selfer idea, followed by the word self, we can look down in the Greek and say, oh, okay, this is what we can look to the Greek for direction. And there's no of there, so we've got to keep that in mind. So Parmenides here is saying, if you divide the great self, again, the great self sounds like great is an adjective. The great self, if you divide the great self, God, the great self, it, even in philosophy, the self is beyond the divine, but you could say in a way it's God. The great self as in God. No. If we're following along like we're doing, if we're following the logo step by step, we know he's talking about, we're having a discussion on the ideas. So when it says the great self, we know that he means the greatness self, or the idea of great as itself an idea. That's the whole conversation. Anyone who's been following up to this point can see that be clearly now, but it's important to keep in mind if you're talking to other people who are new to philosophy or are new to these ideas, that this is where they might miss the mark, but we don't have to. So in English, we have a way of talking about the thing itself, like the, not a apple or a beautiful thing, but the apple or the beautiful, or if we didn't disown ourselves and we didn't care about the opinions of humans, we might even say the hair or the dirt, the clay. We have a way of pointing to that. In English, it's the word, it's the end of the word or the suffix ness. So you can say, oh, you are great, and Messi is great, and LeBron James is great, and Da Vinci is great, and Socrates is great. But if we would talk about the thing that they're all participating in, they have a share in, we can use the word greatness. We put a ness on the end to make it a noun in English. So that's a handy thing that we have in English. So we can read this. For see, if you attempt to divide greatness self, then in that case, it would not be revealed to be without the logos. Two negatives. It would not be revealed to be without the logos. A logon. A makes it without. And that each of the many things that are great will be great by a part of greatness, which is less. So let's unravel this a little bit. So philosophers are adventurers. We're leveling up gamers. We are heroes on a quest. We're also archaeologists. We have to be like Indiana Jones sometimes, or Nicolas Cage sometimes, and pick apart the pieces and to solve the puzzle. So like this one where there's two negatives here. So if you are dividing the idea of greatness, then it would not be without the logos. That's another way of saying it will be with the logos. So if you are dividing the idea of greatness, then it would be rational, it would follow the logos, that each of the many instances that are great, you and Messi and LeBron and Socrates, will be great by having a part of greatness. But if it's a part of greatness, it's less than the greatness itself, right? Like a sail. That would follow this logos, wouldn't it? Would this follow the logos? Socrates says, very much so. right? If Messi is great, he has a part, so it's not, it's less than greatness itself. That goes it's way better. Socrates, Parmenides says, well, what then? Well, each thing, by possessing some small part of the equal, again, the makes it honorific, makes it the noun. Each thing having a small part of the equal, which is less than equalness itself, well, each thing by having a part of the equal, which is less than equalness itself, be equal to another thing by having the part. Why is he asking that? Well, he just says if you have a part, then you're less. So how can you be equal to something if you're less than equal? If you have a part of equal and someone else has a part, that's two different parts. That's not equal. So how can you be equal to another thing if you're both having parts? Socrates says, impossible. Then if one of us has a part of the small, then in that case, the small self, again, the small self, the smallness self, which is bigger than each one of us that has just a part, since it is a part of itself, and thus the small self will then be that which is bigger. You following? Same logic, right? It was okay with greatness. We're kind of being less than greatness because we only have a part. I guess that's okay. Because, LeBron's great, but he's not as great as the greatness, right? But equal, okay, starting to make less sense. If you have less than equalness, then that's not really the same as being equal because it's less. Like, by definition, less is less than equal. And if we're all less, then can we be equal? Starting to get a bit confusing. But here's saying smallness. Well, if you've got a part of smallness, then you've got a smaller part than smallness itself. But if you've got a part, then that's smaller than the whole. So you're smaller than smallness itself. How can that make sense? Smallness is bigger than your smallness. How can smallness be bigger? It's smallness. It's the essence of smallness. It's the pure idea of smallness. How can it be bigger? Let's read it from the start. Then if one of us has a part of the small, then in that case, the small self will be bigger than this, since it is a part of itself, and thus the small self will then be that which is bigger. But on the other hand, this to which the part of the small will be added and then subtracted will be smaller, but not greater than before. Let's read the last part again. This to which the part of the small will be added and subtracted will be smaller. So the thing, this is a confusing way of wording it, but you see that there's much less Greek words here. So that looking at the Greek, this is why this translation is so wonderful. Looking at the Greek underneath will help us convert something that might sound confusing in English into its meaning. So, but on the other hand is just one letter. This, that's not there, right? So on the other hand, this thing that has a part will have, which has the part added and subtracted, participate, you haven't added or subtracted, will be smaller. So if there's something that has a part of the small, it will be made smaller. But smaller than the idea of small. How does that make sense? Socrates. This most certainly cannot come to pass. Of course not. Let's get rid of some highlighting before we move on. So what's happening here? Step-by-step reasoning, starting with something that is easy to see with greatness, moving on to something a bit more complicated, equal, and then something which is quite absurd, the idea of having a part of the idea of smallness, being small than the pure smallness. So he is step-by-step reasoning in dialogue with him. There's a fancy word for dialogue that is structured in a certain kind of way that can be used to help someone see through or address the cause of their problem, or help them through the logos develop in a beneficial way. Dialectic. That's the fancy word for it. But we can say it's a dialogue here, it's not a debate. To you then, O says Parmenides, to you then, O Socrates, in what way are the other existents able to have a share of the ideas, since they are unable to do so according to parts, nor according to wholes? Socrates. Right, so we've got, earlier we talked about they can't have the whole of it, because that will be divided into the many particulars, so it can't be the whole of it. They can't all have the whole. Each particular thing can't have the whole of the thing, because that's many. It's divided now, it's not whole anymore. But it can't have a part because of this reasoning. If you have a part of smallness, you're even smaller than smallness, and that can't make sense. You can't have a part of equal, because that's less than equal, and less is less. Equal is the different than less. And by the way, great. If you have a part of greatness, you've got less than greatness. You'll be smaller, or you'll be lesser. So another word for greatness is, especially when we're talking about less and equal greatness, another word is bigger. You talk about greatness in terms of excellence, but you can talk about it in terms of bigger. So if you have a share of greaterness or bigness, if you have a part of bigness, then you're smaller than bigness, because you've got a part, like the sail. Part of the sail is smaller than the whole sail. If you've got a part of bigness, because you're a big thing, you're smaller than bigness. So you're saying, oh, you've got a part of bigness. Oh, that makes you small. What? Yeah. Oh, you're really big? Oh, yeah, I'm so big. Well, no, that makes you small. No, big is the opposite of small. You're not making any sense. Well, you're saying that thing over there is big, right? Oh, yeah. It can't be the whole of the idea of bigness, can it? Well, no, of course not, because there are many other things that are big. Can't be the whole in an example. It shares in bigness. Oh, okay. So if it shares in bigness, it's only got a part of the idea, right? Like a sail. Yeah. And a part is smaller than the whole, right? Yeah, of course. So that big thing is actually small. It's only a part of the idea. It's just smaller than the bigness itself. So you're telling me that big thing is small? According to Socrates' logos. See where it's going? It's fun. Get puzzled. This is puzzling. I'm puzzled. Which can it be? Can't be either of them. So how can you share in the idea? Because surely we see big things, right? This cannot come to pass. So, to you then, in what way do the existing things in what way are the existing things able to share of the ideas, since they are unable to do so according to parts or according to wholes? Oh, do you have your logos side on? Do you notice a pair? One of the first things we talked about was looking for pairs. Likeness and unlikeness, motion and rest, one of many. Parts and whole are of different colors. Are they a pair? Could they be a self a pair? Could be. Add it to your question sack, add it to your question inventory, and onward adventurers we go. In what other way can they? Socrates says, "No, by Zeus, it does not appear to me to be in any way an easy matter to define something as this." Yeah, tell me about it, mate. Parmenides, well, what next then? What do you say to this? Socrates, well, to what? I suspect that you believe each idea to be one from something such as this. When many particulars appear to you to be great, thou may opine, have the opinion, that by looking at all of them, one certain common ideal, there's no E there, one certain common ideal self can be found to be equally in their case, from whence you are led to believe the great to be one. Let's read that again. I suspect you believe that an idea comes to be one idea in this way. You look at many particulars that to you appear to be great, so then you create the opinion by looking at all of them that there must be one common ideal within them to be found equally in their case, from whence you are led to believe the great to be one. Look at many examples of great things. We think, oh, well, then if there's a great LeBron and there's a great Messi and there's a great mountain and there's a great painting, there must be something equal that makes them great. That is an idea that makes it one. Does that sound familiar? We talked about one of the important distinctions we make in philosophy is, what does idea mean? Is it a concept? Because that's how it's often thought of. Does this sound like the way that we think most people in our society currently think? We look at physical examples through our physical senses and we infer that there must be an idea. We infer a principle. Isn't that how science works? You do experiments, you judge, you set up conditions so you can observe more carefully through experiments. This example, and then you infer that there must be a theory. So that science can change when you have a different physical example of something that gets you to change your theory, which is one of the good things about science, that the theories can change. But is it a problem when we're philosophers? Is it a problem when we're interested in the ideas? Because if we look at physical examples and we infer an idea, like we do in science, we're talking about concepts. In science, we can have ideas and principles, but does that mean they have their own existence? They have ousia? They are knowable? They can be encountered in the metaphysical realm? as a spiritual experience? No, we don't say any of those things. That's crazy talk in a science class. We think of these ideas as inferred concepts. That's why our society is struggling at the moment. That's why we can't come to agreement. That's why we don't challenge relativism. You can't know anything for certain because you can't experience them and verify them for certain. Just inferred concepts. Hey, if you want to infer this concept, then that's up to you. Who cares? How can we know for certain? We can't. So what's the problem that a lot of people have, a lot of cultures have right now? This problem. Hey, it's okay. Socrates had it too. If Socrates wasn't fortunate enough to come across the workings of the writings of Zeno, fortunate enough to be of a certain type of character to ask a good question to Zeno, that Parmenides jumps in. Hey, how lucky that Socrates ran into someone like Parmenides, who has experience with the logos, who can function with it, could recognize his problem, did want to help him, was able to recognize he had a good interest in the logos, and therefore help him. If this didn't happen, Socrates may have just stayed the same as everybody else, thinking that ideas are concepts that you just imagine or deduce or infer by looking at examples. He might have stayed stuck. The same way our culture is stuck. Because how many Parmenides do you run into on a daily basis that has this sort of conversation? If you're this far into this video, then you're probably a rare bird yourself. You might be the sort of person who wishes they could have this conversation more with people. But it's rare, isn't it? So hey, isn't that interesting? The same problem we discussed at the start of this talk, the betrayal of philosophy, that ideas are translated as inferred concepts and not beholdings. A very similar kind of problem Parmenides is recognizing in Socrates. That's why he's struggling with his questions here. How did this come to light? Through dialogue. So hey, where are we? Through the dialogue, he's recognized, well, okay, physical things that share in likeness and beauty and justice, greatness, bigness, smallness, equalness, they can't share by having a part, and they can't share in having a whole, but everything I've seen in the world has either a part of something or a whole of something. So I can't answer this question. What else is there? How else can you have something if you don't? Like if I have a pie, a physical pie, you can either have a part of the pie, have a piece, or you can have the whole pie. That's the only ways you can have pie. There's no more ways to have the pie. He's stuck. Parmenides says, I know why you're stuck. This is why you're stuck. I suspect you believe that each idea to be one because when particulars appear to be something like greatness, have greatness, or be great, you might think that by looking at all of them, a certain common ideal could be found equally in their case, from whence you are led to believe the greatness itself to be one. Socrates, wow, you speak the truth. Oh, he's onto it. Notice that the word the truth is in purple. Why? We don't exactly know why one chose to do it, but could be significant. What are we on the lookout for? ideas themselves. What do we call them? Selfer terms. Why? It's our road. It's part of the road of the Logos. Could truth be one of them? It is in a different color. Maybe. Put it in your sack. Adventurous sack. Parmenides. What then if when you see the great self, greatness itself, with the soul and all other ideas that are great in a similar way, then in turn will not a certain great one necessarily come to light, through which all of these come to light as great? See greatness itself with the soul, and all the other ideas are great in a similar way. From all of these great ideas that you can see with the soul, they'd all be great. Wouldn't beauty itself be great? Wouldn't justice itself be great? Wouldn't likeness itself be great in some way? Ousia itself be great? The truth itself, would that be great? Well, then all of these things must have a greatness. So from all of these, wouldn't a certain great one out of the many come to light, through which all of these come to light as great? Socrates says, well, it seems so. Parmenides. Accordingly then, another offspring idea of greatness will appear, besides the greatness itself, and also of those that partake in self. And besides all these, yet another in turn, through which all of these appear to be great. And surely then each of thine ideas will no longer be one, but an infinite many. So, what does that mean in English? Alright, so you're experiencing with your soul these ideas, and they're pretty great, right? Oh yes, for sure. So you got these ideas, they're all great, like great beauty itself is great, and justice is great, and goodness is great, likeness, and they're all great. And greatness itself is an idea, so that's great too. So you got all these examples of greatness. From all of these, you have to have a certain one idea of great, through which all of them can be great. So you got all of these ideas, including great. So from them as a whole, you got another idea of great. Hang on a second. Now you've got all these great things and this other idea of great. They're all great, right? So you've got another group. All these things that are great and the single idea that they all have that makes them great. Put them in a box and call that great. But now you've got all these things in the box and this idea of great that has to be in all of them. All of the individual ones, plus the thing that makes all of them great. Its title has to be great too. So you have to put that in a box. But hang on a second, you got another thing, you got this box. Wouldn't that box itself be great? So now you have to get another idea to say that even the box, as well as the thing, as well as the title, as well as the parts, that's all great. Now you got another thing called great. On it goes. An infinite plurality of things that are great if you think in this way. An infinite plurality, an infinite manyness. One is joking. Socrates, the empiricist. We talked about physical experiments. That's empiricism. Socrates. Then, Parmenides, each one of these ideas is nothing more than a conception, and will not subsist in any other place other than in the proper self in souls. For in this way, each will indeed be one, and there and that which was just now mentioned will not still happen. Okay, it's hard to read. Each one of these ideas is nothing more than a conception, and it won't subsist in any other place other than in the proper self in souls, in the many examples in souls. Each will indeed be one, and that which we now mentioned won't happen. Okay, so he's saying, well, there isn't any greater subsistence just in your soul as a conception. Like your soul, you have an idea of beauty, that's just for you. Each will be one, each will be in the soul. There isn't a higher existence of beauty itself. So we don't have this infinite manyness problem. That if we say that there is a actually existing idea of greatness that makes all the things great, because that would have to be called this plus all those things would have to share in greatness too. So there's a kind of greatness that makes this great and those things great, but then that would have to be great, so there'd have to be a certain idea of greatness above that makes. So that doesn't happen. We don't have any other higher existence. It's just whatever's in your soul, and that's one, and then that's it, and it's just a conception. That's where Socrates ends. That line. Parmenides responds, "What then? Is each one of these intellections or conceptions one? Whereas, on the other hand, it's a conception of nothing?" You're saying it's one in your soul, but was it a conception of nothing? If it's just a conception, doesn't have any existence other than just a random concept, how can it be a conception of nothing? Socrates replies, "Well, that is impossible. This is impossible." Parmenides, hence, is it an intellection of something? A certain something? Oh my god, all this highlighting. Bear with me a second while I remove this highlighting, because we want the highlighting to reflect our conversation that we're having with the text. The text is like Parmenides and we are like Socrates. Oh, if we're like Socrates, does that mean that we're sharing in likeness? So you and me, because we're like Socrates, we're having a dialogue with the Logos. It's not through Parmenides, like what happened 2,500 years ago. It's through this text. So it's kind of with Parmenides, but it's like that triad with a mean in between to connect Parmenides to us. But we're still having a dialogue with the Logos. We're reflecting, we're looking for key terms, we're asking questions, we're taking questions with us, we're applying them, we're trying to understand them, we're following the reasoning, we're looking for causes, we're making conclusions, we're pushing the conclusions step by step together. So we're having a dialogue. We're following the Logos. It just happens to be through this text. That's the amazing thing about philosophy. The Logos is living. It's alive. It's connecting with us. We are engaging with it. So long as we are doing what page are we on? We're on 13. I want to go back to this part in the text, which really nails down what we're doing. When Socrates shared his interest, he was worried that they're going to make fun of him and they're going to be annoyed at everything he said. But here he goes. He thought that Parmenides and Zeno would be annoyed at each one of these arguments. He said these particulars. They offered up their mind to what the self said. smiling. That's what we're doing. We are having a dialogue with the logos. The medium happens to be the text. That's why having a nose in a text, having a nose in a logos text, reading a Platonic dialogue is a huge part of the journey. How do we do it? How is it so? Because it's our medium through which we can dialogue with the logos. What is that kind of dialogue? A special kind of ousia-ing, reflecting on ourselves and the most significant ideas. How? Through reasoned reflection, looking for key terms, developing questions, sharing our questions, looking for the selfer ideas and causes. We are engaged in it. So we are like Socrates. Like Socrates is to Parmenides, we are like to this text. We are like him, engaging in this, so long as we offer up our mind to self, the same way they did. That's the way in. That's the door. That's the initiation. Are you willing to open up your mind to self? Could you do it as openly and honestly as Socrates did when he talked about what he was struggling with, where he's stuck, how it felt when he was stuck, falling into an abyss of nonsense and utterly perishing? It would have been embarrassing to say he gave up on his reasoning in front of these guys, these great philosophers. He still did it. He opened his mind to himself, to self and the self logos. That's the game. So we are like Socrates. Oh, by the way, if you're like Socrates and I'm like Socrates, that would mean that we're both participating in an idea of likeness. So there must be an idea of likeness that you have and I have because we're like Socrates. But wouldn't you say that idea of likeness has likeness too? You wouldn't say this likeness idea is unlike or lacking likeness. So now we've got three things. We've got you and me and this idea of likeness. All three of them have likeness, right? Right. So they all three must have something that we can call likeness. So now we've got four things. You and me, the idea of likeness that we both have, and then the idea of likeness that applies also to likeness itself and us too. So we've got four things. By the way, that would have likeness too, wouldn't it? How could it be that which everything participates in likeness if it's not likeness itself? So we've got five things. So that's the infinite plurality argument that Parmenides has stumped Socrates with. And his response was, well, okay, then if it's not that, then it just has to be whatever concept you have in your soul and nothing more. And then Parmenides responds, well, hang on a second. If it's a concept, are you saying it's a concept of nothing? Well, no, it can't be a concept of nothing. Well, so it's a concept of something. It is an intellection of a certain something. Yes. Is that something being or non-being? Ontos. What does ontos refer to? Ontos. So we can add this word to our list here. Ontos means being. It's the Greek word for being. It's where we get the philosophical term ontology. Ontology is, in modern philosophy, is the study of, well, no philosophy really. Ontology is the study of being. Often comes with epistemology, which is the study of knowing. So ontology, what exists, what is being. Epistemology, how can we know it, if we can know it. Right, but that's a bit of a tangent. What we're after is the word ontos. That is the Greek word for being. So we'll often see on, like a small abbreviation of the word, in the text. So, ontos, being. Parmenides saying, hey, if it's a concept of something, is it a concept of being, ontos? That realm of existence that actually is, or is it a concept of non-being? We don't exactly know what he means by non-being, but it doesn't seem likely that it would be non-being. Non-being doesn't sound like a something, does it? Socrates says it's of being, of course. Parmenides, will it not be of one certain entity, which that intellection intellects in every case as being one certain idea? Is it a certain entity which your intellect intellects? Being one idea. That thing that is being that you have ideas about must be one, right? Yes. Then will not this idea that is being intellected be one by always being the self in every case? So this idea that we're having ideas about, this idea that we're having thoughts about, that we can intellect, has to be one. Therefore, it has to always be the self. Itself. Now this is interesting here. Will not this idea that is being intellected be one by always being the self in every case? We're at another big puzzle. Because remember, we have 3 ways of reading self. The idea that we're having thoughts about, that has being, it will, it will always be self. It will always be one pure idea. Or, does he mean this self? This is the tricky thing in philosophy, tricky thing in Greek. Keep both. Try your best to hold both. When you come across 2 options, take both. Carry them both with you. Push them both. See where they both go. You might find one to be stronger than the other down the line. But hold both. So which does he mean here? Will not this idea that is being intellected be one by always being the self in every case? Does he mean always being greatness itself, or always itself being of the self? In the same way, our thought, our conception has to be of a pure idea in a higher level. So what we think in our physical state, in our soul, has to be of something that is of being. Would that be one? How does this be? This being idea that we're having thoughts about in our soul, where does it get its oneness from? What does that mean? Let's lay it out here. We are onto something big here. I feel my spidey senses tingling. What do we got? Well, we've got great things that we see. But from those great things that we see, we got Messi with his soccer ball. LeBron with his basketball. And we have mountains. Oh, I hate drawing mountains. You got this, and like this, and like this. No, that kind of looks dirty for some reason. It's a great mountain. From those things, Socrates says, or from those you can take them together and have an idea of I'm at the top of the page. Why don't I go up here? Okay. You can, from those examples that we see of great things, we can come up with an idea of a concept. Oh, Jesus. Hey. Concept of greatness. Concept of greatness. Parmenides says, well, hang on. Must this concept be of something? Yes. And does that something have to be of non-being or being? Being. Ontos. Oops. Being. Greatness being. Now, the next thing we got asked is, the idea that you're thinking about then is one. How? Let's apply that same thinking. This, then, is one. And you could keep going and say, well, we could do the same thing for a concept of likeness. Many examples of like things. But if it's a concept of likeness, and we're doing the same thing, aren't we? We are creating like we had many examples of greatness. Now we're having many examples of concepts. Concept of beauty from examples of beauty. So we got apples. Apples are like each other. We have us reading the text that makes us like Socrates. Examples of things, of like things. We can see examples. Oh my god, I'm running out of space. examples of beautiful things, like a girl, it's beautiful, beautiful hair, beautiful mountain again. Mountains can be beautiful. Trees can be beautiful. Painting can be beautiful. Painting of a mountain, tree, and a girl. So it makes it a painting. From those examples, we can think of a concept of beauty. Now, what have we got? Now we've got a collection, like we had a collection of things. Now we have a collection of concepts, each of which are of being. So now we've got a collection of beings. So we could say greatness being of likeness being beauty being, and they are all one. Now, how do all of these beings have one? Is it because they have a share of the being of oneness? Wow, come on. Oneness. One. N-E-S-S. Well, if it did, wouldn't that also be a kind of being that would also have a share of one? Wouldn't we end up with the infinite regression or the infinite plurality problem? Well, what if they don't have a one because of being? What does Parmenides say? The self, because they are being the self. Well, not this idea that is being intellected be one by always being the self. So we have a question. What the heck? Our question is, what the heck? We have to be more specific than what the heck. Question. How is one related to self, such that these things have their one by being not one, but self? So that's a question we can take with us. Hey, all of these things that are being intellected are one by always being the self in every case. Now, remember, we have two readings. You could say by them all being honorific self. In other words, they are all one because they're always being themselves in every case. They never change. They never become many. They never get split up. Or the self. They are all one because somehow they're all being the self. So there is something called the self that makes each of them one. What's one got to do with self? Wouldn't there be something called one that makes them all one? right? There's something called beauty that makes all beautiful things beautiful. There's something called greatness that makes everything great. There's something called likeness that makes things like. Well, why is there something called self that makes all of the beings one? Wouldn't it be something called one that makes all of the, or oneness that makes all of the beings one? What is Parmenides saying? And why does it make sense to Socrates? There are two possibilities that I can see. Maybe you can see more. What I'm seeing is, well, it could be that he's saying, oh, all of the beings are themselves one because they're always themselves. Or it could be that they're all one because they all share in this higher thing called self, which has a one-ing ability. Could be either. But even in that first case, think about it. They're all one because they're all themselves. Okay, same question. They're all the self? Well, now, got the same problem, except now, instead of having a problem to do with them all being one, you've got all of these beings that are all one. They're all one because the self, because they are, what was it? Being the self, because being the self that makes them all one. Hang on a second. What is this higher thing called the self that each of them has, that each of them participate in? Each of these great things have greatness. Then we ask, what's great? What's greatness itself? Is it a concept of greatness? Well, if it's a concept, it has to be of something. It has to be of a being greatness. Hang on a second. If there are all these different beings, what makes them all one? They all share of something, just as they share in something called greatness. They share in something called one, or oneness. What makes all these things one? What gives the oneness of all these beings? That's the question. Parmenides says, oh, it's because they're all the self. Well, does that mean that we're saying it's self-beauty, it's self? Well, then hang on a second question. If they're all the self, self-likeness, self-greatness, self-beauty, what is this higher still thing called the self? Using his reasoning and turning it about, applying it to what he's saying. This is ousia, using our logos. Remember, we're venturing travelers. We're leveling up travelers who are on the philosophical quest. What are we doing? We're reading the message, but we're also learning how to use the logos. What do we do with our seeing? We're developing these skills that allow us to see and function in a higher way. We have to apply it. Apply it to what? Well, how about apply it to the greatest thing ever written? How about apply it to understanding the greatest conversation ever had? Or at least one of them. One? Wouldn't that be a good way of using your newly evolved skills? Well, are we doing it right now? By recognizing, oh, we're learning something. We are learning a kind of reasoning, a kind of logos, a kind of dialogue from Parmenides and Socrates here. Going from the many into a one. He took us as far as these many beings, through concepts, through beings. A triad here. One, middle, to the end. Being. Turn it about. use your new seeing and apply that new seeing to your discoveries. That's ousia. Using the logos to see the logos. Remember how we talked about mind? What is ousia? Using the mind to mind. The seer, the seeing, and the object seeing are the same. That is ousia. That is the awakening of the eye of the soul. That is what can see into the realm of being. Well, are we doing the same kind of thing to the logos? Applying the logos? What did we just learn? Did we just learn a logos of Parmenides? How to go from many to one? Oh, how about we apply the logos to that logos to discover the self logos? Logos, logosing logos. Is that ousia? Are we leveling up? Are we awakening something? Are we becoming like pure ousia through the logos? If so, we're left with a question. What the heck is this one that makes these things one? Or what the heck is the self that makes them all the self? Because Parmenides is saying, oh, they're all one because of the self. All of these things that you are thinking or you're intellecting are being, and they're always one being because they are the self in every case. Are using his logos to understand that logos, we have a logos question. What the heck is either the self or the one that makes them either one or themselves? Socrates, for some reason, this again has come to light as necessary. Holy crap. He sees it. I don't know how. I don't see it. I have this amazing puzzle and question. I'm stumped. But for somehow Socrates is following along. Well, good for him. What a person, but I mean, great. Great. Anyway, let's keep going. If Socrates see it, let's follow along. Somehow, they're always being the one or the self in each case. Socrates, this again has come to light as necessary. Parmenides responds. But what then? Or does it not appear necessary for you to say that inasmuch as other things participate of the idea, then each of them must be composed of thoughts or intellections, and that all of them must in turn... But what then? Does it not appear necessary for thee to say that inasmuch as other things participate of the ideas, that each of them must be composed of intellections, and that all of them in turn must be able to think? Or intellect? Or will you say that although being intellections, they are without intellect? Alright, so these things that Socrates say we can think about, and then Socrates and Parmenides pushed him. Well, if you're thinking about them as an idea, a concept, they must be of something. By the way, these ideas that we're thinking about, that if you're able to think about them, then they must have the nature of thought, right? They must also be able to think if they're thinkable, if they're composed of thoughts, or if maybe N-O. I think it'd be helpful to get the Greek here. If they're composed of intellections, then they should themselves be able to intellect, shouldn't they? Or how can they be composed of intellections if they are without intellect? Socrates says, well, that possesses no logos. If there's no logos, then we're not on the right path. Nevertheless, O Parmenides, it seems to me indeed to be clearly seen especially as follows. On the one hand, these ideas are set up in their very nature such as paradigms or models, whereas on the other hand, the others are assimilated to these models and are their likeness. And the self-participation by other things is nothing else than to become assimilated to the selves of the idea. I think it's time we take a break, because I think he goes on and there's a lot of highlighting I have to get rid of. We have some slashes here in the text because idea or species. I think the translator here is keeping both, because we've already seen that Socrates is confused whether ideas are just concepts or if they have a being. He is going along with Parmenides to saying, well, even if they are concepts, they have to be about something. And that thing that it's about can't be non-being, so it implies there must be a being still. But Socrates' reasoning here is saying, well, it seems that the ideas themselves are paradigms. And the things that are like them are being assimilated to them. It's a different way of thinking now. Earlier, when he said there are no ideas, it's just concepts, it was one mode of thinking. Now it's a different one. He's saying they do exist, they're just different and being assimilated to them. It's a new model of thinking, like a different level he's in. The translator, I think, is keeping both idea and species alive in the text, because maybe the translator is unsure whether or not he has transitioned, and he still thinks the ideas are just varieties or species and not actually being things. So it's still a concept, but a variety or a species of concepts. Like in empiricism or science, we have a species of wolves and a species of dogs. We don't think it actually has an existence, but you could say that there is an ideal species of the greyhound, and the examples of greyhounds are kind of like the paradigm of the ideal greyhoundness. Or there are many different kinds of wolves who are like the paradigm of the ideal wolf, but it's just a species. It's not actually an existing wolf or existing pure idea of wolfness. I think that's why in the text we have idea/species. So we have to keep both alive. Maybe Socrates is saying, well, I do admit there is such a thing as the idea, the existing being of things, and physical things in our world that we see with our senses. The many examples are like that paradigm, and they're getting assimilated. I think that's where he's at, given he agreed with Parmenides that there must be beings that are selves in one. But I think we've gone far enough into the journey of philosophy along the Logos and discovered a lot of puzzles, got a lot of questions, got a lot of got really mixed up. I hope you haven't fallen into an abyss that you are afraid of. Enjoy the confusion, embrace the confusion. Literally, that's part of it. Being puzzled, being all at odds, just as Socrates was allowing himself to be and admit with Parmenides. That's being opened to mind. That's being open to mind and self and Logos. I hope you've got puzzled. I hope you've got confused. I hope you've got some questions and terms in your adventurer's your adventurer's inventory to take with you and nurture and level up along your journey. And I hope you're as puzzled as I am, and you've got things to puzzle about. Hold on to it, nurture it, keep it there, and see what happens. The thing about the philosophical quest, the quest of the Logos, is the Logos is not apathetic to you. See? Thumbs up. In other words, if there is an intelligence, like what did we just read? If these beings have an intelligence, and if we share in them in some way, then wouldn't they be intelligent? If we can access them through our reasoning and through the logos, then wouldn't their intelligence be extended through that logos if we can reach them through the logos? And if they are intelligence, and if we do share in them in some way, and there is some sort of connection, we don't quite get what it is, but we're going along on the journey with Socrates to understand how exactly we connect with these intelligent existing beings. If they do have intelligence, and we do connect with them in some way, what would that intelligence be? Well, we mentioned things like justice, and we mentioned things like goodness. Would those intelligent beings that connect with us extend that goodness to us? How could they be goodness but be bad? How could they be intelligence but be dumb? In other words, if there is an intelligence and a goodness to these existing beings that we're trying to discover, wouldn't they extend it to us? Wouldn't they be good and intelligent and capable? If so, then if we're genuinely on this quest, would they respond to us like Parmenides did to Socrates? Parmenides, would you call him dumb? No. Intelligent. Would you call him bad? Well, I don't think so. He's quite good. Would you say he's incapable with no connection between him and others? No. Capable. So if these beings, these ideas that we're discovering are of intelligence, are of goodness, we can reach them and they can reach us in some way to participate in them. Therefore, there's some capability, intelligent, good, and capable. How would that function? There's a word for that in philosophy called providence. A care that's extended through the logos based on the beings that participate of the logos in the higher sense being good, capable, and intelligent. And what does that mean for us? Well, if we're puzzled and we're genuinely on this quest, would it make sense that their good, intelligent, capable nature would extend out to help us in some way? Through helping us keep our questions, maybe giving us insights, maybe giving us clues, maybe using dreams to help guide our journey? Would that follow? Would that follow the logos? Would that be rational? If the beings that we're seeking to understand and know through the logos are themselves intelligent, good, and capable, and therefore aware of us on this journey. If that's the case, maybe it's okay to be puzzled then. Maybe you'll get some help on your journey. Maybe you have a spirit guide on your adventurous shoulder, helping you. Like every good anime, there is some sidekick. Well, not everyone, I shouldn't say that. Like many good games or animes or movies or whatever, the hero has a intelligent guiding sidekick or spirit guide of some kind. Maybe we are doing that too, and we are sharing in that too. Would that follow? Would that follow what we're seeing? Is Parmenides functioning in a similar way? Is he being assimilated to a higher paradigm? If so, what does that tell us about the paradigm? If Parmenides is functioning that way, having been assimilated through likeness to that, maybe Maybe that's a question you can take with you as well. Is the Logos aware of my seeking the Logos? Does it help? Is it on our side? Is it a friend? Does it care? I hope some of these questions have resonated with you. I hope you are curious about them. Of course, these are not things to be taken for opinion, but things to be seen for yourself if you care about them, if you think them worth answering. And I hope you do. And I hope you share in my puzzlement, because I'm all wrapped up in questions and puzzles myself. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for coming on this adventure with me. And I hope to see you next time. Oh, and please like and subscribe and all of that stuff. Thank you so much. Until next time. What?